The wind is raging outside tonight, but my fire is curling down into a beautiful hotbed of coals. And whether it's a peat fire in a crofter's hearth, or an open fire in a cave 1,000 years ago, long winter nights like this were meant for storytelling. And I'd like to share with you a story that an old man gave to me. He also gave me his walking stick with the hook of remembering to help me tell you the story. It comes from Ireland from so long ago that you wouldn't recognize it. Thick forests covered the entire island, no cities to be found. And the people who lived there, well, they lived in the river bottoms, down in the valleys where it was fertile and they could grow their own food. One particular valley began to have problems with livestock. It was disappearing. A piglet one night, a lamb the next night, and then a chicken. And farmers did then what they do now. Walked up and down the valley and talked to each other about the weather and the woes of farming. And they discovered that every single farmer in the valley was losing livestock. Now this was critical because there was no way to go buy food. These animals fed their families. And they knew what it was, because after an animal disappeared, the next morning there would be huge wolf prints in the mud, carrying away. So they put their heads together to try to decide if they could fix the problem, and they made traps that went up into the trees with nets, and they made traps down into the ground in pits. And they tried shooting bows and arrows and spears, but it was like shooting at shadows. They couldn't even catch them or see them. They even followed the tracks up to the end of the valley to the cave where the tracks went in, but the tracks never came out. Now things were very desperate. They had tried all they could try, and they decided to go visit a woman named Biddy Early. In the tradition of Ireland, there is no such thing as witches, no warty-faced women who do mean things to humans. There were, however, charm setters, wise women, healers. And that's what Biddy Early was, a charm setter, and she was very well known. So they went to see her, to see if she could help. They told her the story, and she shook her head and said, "Alas, I'm afraid this was going to happen. I'm going to tell you why you have wolf problems. You know, at the far end of the valley, up the mountain at the very top, that old, crumbly, tumble-down castle? Well, in its day, it was beautiful. It was built by a clan chief named Rory, and it was a good time for all. He loved his people and they loved him. He took such good care of them, and they would do anything for their clan chief. But, as often happens, bad things come along, and a message was sent from a rival clan that said, in 3 days' time, we're coming. We're going to sack your castle, we're going to kill your warriors, and we're going to take your 3 daughters with us to raise as our own." Now Rory was a brave, strong, wizened warrior. He had seen so much in his life. Nothing about that message scared him, except for the daughters. And he feared for them. So he gathered the girls together and he took them into the woods to the cave where his charm setter lived. And he asked the old woman, "Would you please, please care for my girls? I don't know what's going to happen at this battle, but would you promise to care for them for me?" And she said, "Of course I will. Absolutely I will." And she set a charm upon them and turned them into wolves. Not ordinary wolves. Huge, majestic beasts with silver black fur and fiery eyes. Well, the 3 days came. The rival clan came. They did burn and sack the castle, and they did kill all the warriors, including clan chief Rory. But they never found the sisters. Now, charm setters never leave home. She had no idea what happened at the battle. She just knew that she had promised Rory that she would care for them. And she cared for them so well. She took them for walks, and she brushed their sleek coats, and she sang to them and told them stories. And as the years went by, she began to love them as her own. Charm setters do live a lot longer than mortals. But I did hear from the fairy folk recently that she had passed away. So you see, those wolves don't mean you any harm at all. They just lost their caregiver, and they're doing what wolves need to do, which is eat. But I'll tell you how to break the spell. 2 valleys over is a castle with a harper. You go to him and tell him the story, and you promise him safety, and you promise him as much money as you can give him, and you bring him back, and you have him go up, up, up the mountain to the ruined castle of Rory, and you have him sit in the center in the dark of night. And when the sun comes up, you have him play his beautiful harp from sun up through the whole arc of the day to sundown. I think that will fix your problem. So the farmers together trooped over 2 valleys, farther than anyone had ever been away from home. Quite an adventure. They found the harper, they told him the story, they promised him safety, and they promised him as much money as they could gather between them. And we all know that musicians would risk life and limb. There is no danger too dangerous if you're going to get paid to play music. He followed them back to their valley. And in the dark of night, he went up, up, up the mountain, up, up to the walls of the ruined castle. He huffed the harp over the tumbled boulders and into the briars and the brambles, and stumbling and falling and feeling his way in the dark, he finally found a flat stone he felt like he could sit on safely. And there he sat and waited. And when the first rays of the sun began to come up in the east, he began to play. And he played and he played, and he couldn't believe his good fortune. This is such a beautiful place, and it's a dry day, and there's blue sky and puffy clouds, and I'm getting paid to play music here. This is wonderful. Well, he kept playing, and when the sun got to the highest point of the arc, out of the corner of his eye, he caught 3 figures coming towards him. Now, harpers can't really look away. They have to concentrate, so he couldn't look, but he could tell they were big, and they were coming closer and closer and closer, until he could hear them breathing. They laid down on the grass beside him, and they crossed their huge paws and laid their massive heads down and closed their eyes and listened to his music. Well, it was hard to concentrate, but he kept playing. He thought, this is the most magical thing I've ever experienced. They're not going to eat me. They're listening. They're listening to my music. It was so wonderful. He played and he played all afternoon, and just before the sun went down on the western hill, he realized he was totally exhausted. He had never played that long at one time in his life. And people think playing the harp is easy, but I'm here to tell you it's hard work. You have to sit up straight and tall, hold your arms just right, concentrate on your fingers and your music. It's hard work, and he was so tired. Without even thinking, he dropped his hands beside him for a short rest. And in that same instant, those 3 huge wolves leapt to their feet, and he turned to see them for the first time. They were bigger than he even imagined, and fiery eyes. He was quite frightened, and he realized he didn't do what he was supposed to do. He was supposed to play till the sun went down, and the sun wasn't down yet. And they started to back away. And he said, oh, please wait, please don't go. I am so honored that you were listening to my music. I'm so honored that you liked it, but you were hearing it with wolf ears. If you could only hear it with human ears, I think you would love it even more. But it was too late. They had wandered back into the woods. Oh, he knew in his gut he had ruined everything. He was supposed to play till the sun went down, and he didn't do it. And how was he going to tell those farmers that he had totally made the mistake? And when the sun did fall behind the western mountain, in the time that we call the gloaming, where you can see things but not very clearly, and there's magic and mist and softness all around, out from the forest edge came 3 women, beautiful women, dressed in rags and barefoot, and each one of them carrying a huge wolf pelt. And they came closer and closer and closer, and they laid those pelts in the grass beside him. And they bowed to him, and they backed away and disappeared into the woods. Now there's 4 happy endings to this story. The first happy ending, well, that's the farmers, because they no longer lost any livestock and never again had trouble with wolves. The second happy ending, well, that's the sisters. They continued going and going and going through the forest until they came out the other side where the sea meets the land, and they built themselves a cottage, and they became charm setters themselves. The third happy ending, well, that's Biddy early. The word got out that she helped those farmers and rid themselves of the wolves, and, well, she was already famous, but now there were lines of people at her cottage for help. The fourth happy ending, well, that's our Harper. It's said that he took those 3 beautiful silver black pelts to a fair and sold them for a huge undisclosed amount of money. And word got out of his talents and how he had helped and what a good harper he was, and he became so in demand by all the castles in the countryside and paid well. He became a very wealthy man. And we all know that that hardly ever happens to harp players. And that's the story of the Valley of the Wolves.